Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Ray Marquina, aka the official Arcaneer, and in today's video, we're going to be exploring the concept of dynamic lakehouse and warehouse connection strings in Microsoft Fabric, specifically looking into Data Factory. We'll start by leveraging dynamic content, so you'll be able to learn how you can streamline your deployment pipelines, and this will minimize discrepancies between environments and reduce the need for manual intervention when code is being promoted. So to begin, we're going to start by creating two brand new workspaces. So let me go ahead and do that. We're going to create a dev and a production. So let me say pro demo dev workspace. Let me ensure that it is on my trial capacity. Looks like it is. And then let's also create a production variant. And then all I'll do here is replace this with prod and also verify that that is on my trial capacity, and it looks like it is, and click apply. So now that I have the two workspaces, the next thing that I'm going to want to do is create a deployment pipeline. You can find deployment pipelines by navigating to your left, clicking on the ellipses, and then click on deployment pipelines if you don't see it within this list here. So I'm going to create a new pipeline. We'll give it a name. We'll say pro demo pipeline, and then click next. And then in this part of the wizard, this is where you're able to establish how many stages you want. You can add more if you'd like, or you can even reduce how many stages you have. I think at minimum you need 2. So in our case, because we only have the 2 workspaces, I'm going to remove test and keep the development and production stages here, and then press create and continue. Now, once you get to this stage, this is where you're able to assign the environment to your workspace. So for development, I'm going to call this one the Pro Demo Dev Workspace. I'm going to assign it to this one. And then for production, I'm going to assign it to the Pro Demo Prod Workspace. Once they've been assigned, the next thing you need to do is click on this checkbox. So this will assign the workspace for you. So I'll do that for our development and our production setup here. All right, so now that that has been configured, we're going to go back over to our workspaces and we're going to find the dev workspace here. So even though I clicked dev, it looks like it brought me over to prod. So let me try that again. Looks like it's not giving me the opportunity to go into dev. So let me refresh here and let me see if I can change that. Okay, so now I am in dev. And we're going to provision a few objects here. So the first thing that we want to make is the Lakehouse. So let's go ahead and give this a meaningful name. We'll say Bronze Lakehouse. And I am going to ensure that schemas is enabled for my Lakehouse. So I'm going to go ahead and select create. And in order for us to populate some data into this Lakehouse, what I'm going to do next is create a notebook. So I'll open that up. We can give it a meaningful name and say notebook load control table. And now we can start. Before we actually start writing our code, let's go ahead and attach our Lakehouse. We click add. I'm going to say with existing schema and identify the location and the Lakehouse name and click add. And you could write code so that you can dynamically select your Lakehouse based on Lakehouse name. However, I just find it easier to attach. So let me say spark.sql, and we can write our DDL statement. Let me add 2 more here. All right, so let's say create table if not exists. We'll give it a table name. We'll just say something generic like control table. And we can add in our definition. So we'll say ID. We'll take a schema name. We'll assign it as string value. And we'll give a table name and also assign a string value. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and kick off that cell. And while that's running, let's go ahead and insert some data inside of this control table. So I'll say insert into control table, and we'll set a value here. So the intention here is just to set some data here so that we can see data coming back within our lookup activity. And we'll say that we want the orders table to be inserted into our control table. I'll make sure that syntax looks right. Insert into table, values, DBO, orders. Yep, that looks right. So I think it's going to take a minute for my cluster to start up. Once it starts, we'll come back and review the rest of the code. So our code for our first cell has finished executing. So if I refresh our schema, we should be able to see that that table has landed under DBO. And what we're going to do next is load in some data. So I'm going to go ahead and click our second cell where we're going to be inserting orders. And if we want to query that, let me go ahead and write just a simple select statement for our control table, so we can see if it populated and loaded the data correctly. And there we can see that we have ID 1, DBO, and the table name orders. So what we're going to do next is navigate back over to our workspace and create our pipeline. So let me select data pipeline. Let's give it a meaningful name. Let's say PL lookup. And let's go ahead and create. And then we're going to navigate over to activities, and we're going to select a lookup task. And let's also give this a meaningful name. We'll say lookup control table, and then navigate over to settings. Now, under connections, I can click the drop down, and what it's going to do is it will provide the Lakehouse that you provision within your workspace as a connection. However, the reason we don't want to select this is because if we deploy this into production, what's going to happen is it's going to retain the development control table connection string and not selecting the one that we really want, which is going to be the production one. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to select use dynamic content. And for right now, I'm just going to put in a placeholder string so we can see what this is going to change to. So now you can see that this wizard has changed a bit, and now I have a connection and a workspace ID as well as a connection type. So what I'm going to do is hover over the I and then go to the Learn More page. And this is tailored to the copy activity, but this is also going to work for the lookup activity as well. And if you read through this documentation, what you're going to find is that connection ID is looking for our ID of our warehouse, KQL database, or our Lakehouse. So if you were, I wanted to show this to you so at least you could go through this and read, but I will let you know that it is going to say that the connection ID is going to be that of our Lakehouse and our KQL database or warehouse. In our example, we're using our Lakehouse. And you can also see that it's going to be asking for a workspace ID. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this one first because this one is probably the easiest to change. And if we go over to system variables, you're going to see that they provide a workspace ID variable for us called pipeline.datafactory. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now when this executes, it's going to extract the workspace ID of whatever workspace I'm in. So I don't need to worry about having to hard code this value. I can just know that when this runs in production, it will extract that workspace ID that I'm currently in. Now, for the connection string, it's going to be a little bit different because we are going to need to make an API call here. So I'm going to navigate over to the Microsoft REST API documentation. And if I search for Lakehouse, you're going to see that they do provide an API for listing out our Lakehouses. So you can see that it's going to be a get method that's used for this, and this is the URL. So I'm going to copy this. And what it takes as a parameter is going to be that workspace ID. And if we look at the response JSON that we get back, we'll see that ID is, one of the elements that is returned. So that's what we're going to be able to use to leverage a little bit of ADF expressions to extract this value back. So let me go ahead and go back to our our data factory. And let me select web activity. Okay, so now we have a new web activity here. Let me say call Lakehouse API. And let me navigate over to settings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select more. I'm going to select the version 2 data source. And then we're going to paste in our base URL. So the base URL that we're going to have for this is going to be this v1 up until the v1. And if we want to paste in the audience URI, we're just going to take the base URL here and paste that in, api.fabric.microsoft.com. And you can see that it's already trying to select one for me, but this is going to be a new one for me. So I'm going to give this a meaningful name. We'll call this Get Lakehouse Connection. And this does support SPNs. So let me go back there so you can see. So with this API, we now can use service principals. I would imagine that if you are in a production setting, use an SPN as opposed to your organizational account. If you are working with a service account, then you could certainly use this option. I don't have an SPN provision, but I would strongly advise that if you do have an SPN, go ahead and use that. But for this purpose, I'm going to just use organizational account and click sign in. So I'll get a pop-in for my OAuth 2 authentication. I'll select my name and then connect. So in the back end, this is going to be establishing my connection. And then what I need to do is I need to paste in the relative URL. So this is going to be the stuff that changes here. So let me go back and extract that API call. And we have all the way up until v1 for our base URL. So now what we need to add is the remaining part of what the API call is going to be. So I'm going to say concat, and we are going to bring this in. And I will close this off, and then we can use the variable for our workspace ID. So again, that's under system variables. Let me click in here and give in the variable there. And then let me go ahead and close this off. And close off the parentheses. And it looks like I am missing a comma here. So let me go ahead and add it with the concat function. So what this concat function has essentially done is say, append the workspaces and then the workspace ID for the list of lake houses that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to specify that this is a get. I'm going to deactivate this lookup and go ahead and run this and see if I am able to extract the output value from this API call. And what I should hopefully have is a list of lake houses that I have currently provisioned within my workspace. So this will just take a minute here. And we can see that now our activity is in progress. And now that it's succeeded, let's take a look at our output. And here we can see that we have extracted our value. So you can see that the Lakehouse ID is going to be ending in E2E2. And again, if I go to my bronze Lakehouse and look for that ID, we can see that it does indeed end in E2E2. So now that we have the value, what we need to do next is just extract the ID from the output value. So let's navigate back to our pipeline. And I'm going to walk you through what the expression is doing based on the value that is returned from the API that we've just called. So let me close out of this and let's look at the expression first so that we can get a good understanding. But I'll come back to this output. What we first need to do is we're going to need to navigate over to variables. And I'm just going to create a variable just for validation purposes. I'm not actually going to use it in my implementation, but I want to validate that the output that I'm going to be getting to extract the ID is exactly that and nothing more. So I'm going to create a variable called Lakehouse ID. And then we're going to navigate back to activities and pull in a set variable activity. We can put it on success, navigate to settings, select the variable ID that we just created, and then add our dynamic content. So I've already written the code here, so let me go ahead and just copy and paste it and make some corrections to the web activity name. So what I'm going to do is give this the name of the web activity it's pulling it from. So it's going to be called call Lakehouse API. And I have that in 2 locations. So we will just update both of those. Okay, so what this is doing is it is going to first take the output.value and convert it to a string. Then what it's going to do is it's going to use the index of function, which is going to return the spot of where my value of my lake house lives. So if you have a different lake house name other than what mine is, bronze_LH, this is where you're going to want to replace the name of your lake house so that you can search for the beginning part of that lake house name. And then what I do is I use a subtract function to get back to the point of the starting position of the ID that I want to extract. And I'm only going to go over 36 spaces because that's going to be the end. So I'm only going to substring 36 spaces because that's going to be the end of the ID that I want to capture. So if I go back to my output and we look at the output of the call, right? Maybe if I walk through this in real time, you'll be able to get a better understanding. So again, it is going to give me back the indexes of is going to give me the position back of where this number is. And then I've counted backwards to get me to the starting point of where this value is after the ID from the display name of Lakehouse. And then I'm going to count over 36 spaces to get me just this value here alone. So if you have a different name for a lake house, this code should still work. As a matter of fact, this code should work even if you have multiple lake houses. The only time that it may break is that if Microsoft decides to change the structure of this value return output. But if you have lake houses and you have 10 lake houses, it's going to search for that display name, work backwards to find the ID from where this name exists and extract that value. So I've seen other sources online where they just extract maybe the first lake house. So if you have multiple and your control table doesn't live there, that's not going to work. I wanted to come up with a solution that would work based on the name of the lake house that you have, that you know where your control table is going to live. Now, if you have a warehouse or KQL database, you may need to change the values that I have set for your subtraction as well as your substring, but you can count backwards to try and figure that out. It shouldn't vary too much. It should kind of just be dependent on the type name that's going to fluctuate those values. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and once again deactivate my lookup table, and let's go ahead and run just to verify whether or not this is extracting the correct value for me. So let me go ahead and refresh. We are kicking off our web activity. And then we should be able to, again, verify whether or not this is going to give us the return value that we're looking for. So our set variable output now returns us a value that ends in E2E2, which is telling me that that is the Lakehouse ID that I am looking for. So let me go ahead and just extract the expression here. So I will cut that out. I will delete the variable. Again, this was really only used for validation and testing purposes, and I can go ahead and delete this variable here. Let me activate my lookup once again. And now I can go to the connection placeholder and paste in the expression that we just built. Let me go ahead and click OK. And now we need to give in our table name. So it's going to be the schema's DBO, and the table name is control table, I believe. Let me just verify that. Yep, control table. And this is case sensitive. So if you do put in improper casing, this will fail. And now that that's all set, let me go ahead and save and run this. And let's see if this is going to return the values of that table now that we've set up the dynamic content. So it should just take a minute here. You can see that once again, we're making that API call. But now instead of calling the variable, now we are doing a lookup to our control table, and we should see the orders value returned to us from our control table. All right, so we are now in progress, and it should just take another second here or so to pull back that value. All right, we can see that it has succeeded. And now we can see that we get one count, and we are returning our orders table and our DBO schema. So that's exactly what we're looking for in order to set up our dynamic content within our lookup activity. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to deploy this to production and see what happens. And to do that, I am just going to navigate back over to my pipeline, my deployment pipeline, I should say. And we should start to see that there are some changes here that are happening. So if I click within this like bronze band here, or yellow band, whatever color it is, you're going to see that there are some things that can go into my production environment. I'm going to select them all. So you're going to see that we're going to get our notebook, we're going to get our pipeline, and we're going to get our Lakehouse. So let's go ahead and deploy those objects. Now, for those of you who have not used dynamic content, once you deployed, what you would then need to do is you would need to go to your production environment, modify your settings, and then be able to select the correct values from the control table that point to the Lakehouse in your lookup activity or your copy activities. What this is going to do is it's going to remove that dependency or that manual intervention. And because we did this through dynamic content, we should no longer need to do those implementation steps or those manual implementation steps. So you can see that we have deployed. And what I'm going to do is I do need to not load my control table, but what I do need to do is I do need to create my control table. So let me go ahead and kick that off in production. Now you could have a notebook activity that'll create this for you if it doesn't exist, and maybe do a merge so you don't keep having the same values come in. But in this case, we're just going to run this manually. And let's go back to our well, let's just give it a minute. My cluster started, so this should just take a second for it to create. Now we could do one of two things, right? We could insert a value that was different than there in dev, or we could not insert this record, and we could see that nothing gets returned when we hit up our pipeline, our data pipeline. So let's do that, right? Let's verify that this is working the way we intended. So I'm going to open up our pipeline. And again, if I were just to use the connection, the default connection, and not do dynamic content, what this would have done is this would have been already set for my Lakehouse in my development environment, which is not what I wanted. Instead, what I'm looking to have is the Lakehouse that's pointed to my production instance. And when I hit this lookup activity, it should come up empty because there's no values within that control table, as I haven't populated any. So the test is to see that I truly get nothing back. So let's go ahead and see what this returned for us in a way of output. So remember, my Lakehouse in dev was ending in E2E or E2E2. Now we can see that it's E58. And if we look at our control table, we look at the output, we can see that we truly got nothing back, right? Letting me know that we are off to a good start. Let's go back to the notebook. And let's maybe say that, there isn't an orders anymore in production. Let's say it's orders V2. Let's go ahead and insert that value just to really drive the point home that there are different sets of data within dev and production. And let me go back to the pipeline. Let's go ahead and run this again. And let's ensure that we are getting orders V2 back in our output. And if I look at our output now, we're going to see that the output does reflect orders V2 coming back to us. So that's going to do it for this video. I hope you found this tutorial on dynamic content for Lakehouse and warehouse connection strings helpful. By using dynamic contents and the Fabric REST API, you can create more efficient and reliable deployment pipelines while reducing manual effort and environment drift. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Don't forget to leave a comment below if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future videos. Thanks again for tuning in, and we're going to see you in the next one.